Most of the horse conch were dead. Their pink-tongued bodies leaked from the marvelous architectures of their coiling shells. The few alive stretched as taffy over the sand, sucking into their muscle mouths stranded surf clams, winkles, bay scallops, and oysters. It was a feast for the lucky and the strong. Ruth said, "The ocean is a hungry water." A kind of invasion. The storm had ripped the conch from the shallow waters of the Florida shelf, casting their horny crowns northward onto the New England beaches. They made a vinegar stench. They made an absurd display of death and dying. "See if there's a miracle shell," Ruth told me. "No chips or cracks. Toss the living back into the tide." We were without electricity still, and in the humid aftermorning of the hurricane, the house looked sullen. A grayness seeped from its windows. Ruth and I had put on our rubber boots to stalk the dunes and explore the new world. Each conch shell was beautiful, the undulating colors a kind of stilled light. Together, in a line, crusting up and down the beach, they spooked. Alongside, hulking drifts of rockweed shriveled in the sun, their bladders, clumped together as grapes, as small as a child's fingertips, popped and hissed under our bootsteps. The inner liquid oozed milkily. Small sounds all together, and without the wind, the beach was subdued. The water was nearly flat, as though we looked up to it from the ocean floor, as though the silent underworld had come aground. When Ruth spoke, it was with exhaustion, with deep, difficult breaths. "A thick mess," she said. "This nasty heap just goes on, doesn't it? I probably can't go much farther. Is that all right?" Ruth had been doting on me that morning, at my elbows when I woke, nearby while I made tea at the range, quick to touch my hands and shoulders. "That's fine," I said. I went on, far enough north that I could see Ruth's slender body, but not hear her labored movements. I did want to be alone, that was true, and Ruth knew it. But she was tender from the night in her dark confession. I hadn't said anything to her that morning. My eyes were dull from the whiskey, and I couldn't read her face. I didn't want to try. The beach I'd never really seen that way before, buried under flotsam and snail, without its mirage heat rippling toward the sun. I know you didn't force a storm for me. You don't do things for us, but sometimes you'd like us to see the world your way. Maybe you wanted me to notice the grandeur, so much larger than a single woman, one animal's death. The living conch, the shells closest to the tide, dragged themselves toward the water's edge. They marred the sand beneath them, scraping shallow trenches. Everything returned. You wished for me to think that you were behind us, always. To you, Ruth would return. I was not so sure. If I think of you biblically, temperamental, prone to phenomena, then you tossed something old onto land, the ocean. Old as the earth, which is something I know from school as much as from Genesis. They're not enemies, science and religion. They tell similar truths. One truth they both possess is your love of violence. On the beach that morning, it was early enough for the moon to linger along the western horizon, its chalky smudge scarcely cresting the cedar canopy. The moon, some still think, is a cast-off, a chunk of rock dislodged at the very start. Before the crust settled, the draw of the sun and the spin of our molten distillate rent a slab of granite from the face of the earth. It came from where the Pacific now churns. The sea floor of the Pacific is a basalt moon scar. The moon is a densified scab, a lovely glowing scab brought about by the unimaginable tearing. So the moon and the earth are the same, and the water is beckoned home in two directions. The seas are locked. The seas can only move in repetitious tides. There is barely space for you between beauty and violence. Every day that I am alive, I am more trouble. Your signs are everywhere. They are meant for anyone, which means they are meant for no one. They too are as old as the earth. They too have always been there. A saint is someone who sees what's there. The seeing has since worn me down. It has nearly wiped me out. If you were to look upon a woman with your absolute eye, your look would destroy her. But a saint destroys herself that you might see her. The earth once cleaved itself, now it delights in the glow of the sun and the moon. Your signs can never be unseen. My own lost particle came calling back to me that morning. There'd been nothing in the wreckage to take home to Ruth, no auspicious conch shell. A few with roughened corona, chipped here and there, made dangerous by newly jagged spires, but unbroken otherwise. I was careful not to cut myself, to inspect only the abandoned husks. I turned them over in my hands, gripping the tapered, polished flanks. I traced the whorls with my dirty thumbs, some I held to my ear. I heard slowly the air going in and out. The clouds rolled on, lumps of sooty dough swallowing each other, and the temperature rose. I began to sweat. My legs grew heavy in the boots, and my neck ached from watching the ground, from seeing each step. I left the beach by way of a narrow path into the nearby woods. It wound east through low, leafy trees. The long grass crowded the soft mud and swept at my ankles. It was always cool in there, always blue dark, even at noon, in the shadows of the branchwork. I walked slow, and my lungs relaxed, and my heart waited. The sweat at my collarbone ran down my chest. It gave me a chill, thin and deep. I saw the postman from the woods, his face flushed, his blue cap cocked perilously atop his balding head. His navy jacket, unzipped, billowed in sudden small gusts, and I imagined the sea behind me now, beginning to mutter. The postman climbed fussily over fallen limbs that choked the dirt road, a letter in hand. I shouted to him, and his eyes blinked curiously, quick as the hummingbird, until I stepped out from the woods. He held the letter up. I went to him and took it. I didn't understand how great the silence was until she broke it. You're so serious, Em. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with it. I keep it in the drawer, the envelope. Sometimes I feel awful for having it. I have cousins, you know, they're Catholics, and we've been to their church. I think I know what you've done. I don't think I can eat it. I'm not sure if that's what you wanted. I accidentally put a book on top of it, inside the drawer. It didn't break, but now the envelope has a little circle pressed into it. The print the wafer made under the heavy book. But there's nothing in it, right? It's just bread, is my understanding. But I see the impression, and I know it's in there, and I think sometimes the light is funny, and the circle part, the stamping the book made of the bread, looks a little darker than the rest of the paper. Like there was a tiny bit of oil on the bread. But now it's made a giant Braille bubble. I think in Braille the single dot is an A, so there's an A in my drawer, and I think about it more than I would like. I want to send it back to you, but I'm afraid to move it now. If it's dry, it might be brittle. It might break. What a stupid gift. I'm not mad, Em, I just don't know what you meant by it. Can you explain your scheme to me? I've been missing you. I haven't told anyone because I don't know how. Ciao, ciao, Lord. The letter came at such a curious moment. I have to wonder who had written it. Were you speaking through that girl, that token of my girlhood? It didn't really matter what it said, just that it had come, that Esther's voice had become undisappeared. I imagine the same for your men. You found 2 disciples on the road to Emmaus, but they had no sense. They were still crying. Those men, caught as fish in a net, tangled in loss, would be the last to see your face and remember it. That recognition, when it came, bringing such joy your words were lost. The writing was in pencil, and I knew Esther's left hand often ruined her notes, the meat of her palm trailing across the page and smudging the graphite. The bottom edge of the paper was also dirty. There were maybe the traces of a fingerprint. I put it to my lips and smelled it. Esther used creams on her hands and elbows, some of them light and fragrant, some of them stale synthetic butters from the grocery store. I bit the corner of the letter. A piece came away with my teeth, and I chewed it to a pulp. I swallowed it, and I felt nothing new. I thought of what to write back, what to say to Esther that wouldn't sound insane. But all my impulses lived in my hands. I didn't want to speak to her. I wanted to touch her hair. I didn't want to explain the wafer. I wanted to hold it up to the light, to set it on her eye. I wanted to press it under her fingernails. It bothered me that she'd not taken it out of the envelope, that she'd not touched it. I imagined eating it in front of her and then kissing her, pushing little crumbs between her teeth. I wanted to spit it into her mouth. There were things I knew I couldn't write in a letter, but with my body I could show them.